I am an alcoholic. My home group is the East Naples Men's Group. My sobriety date is December 4th of 2005. I have a sponsor. I also have the beautiful privilege of sponsoring men. And my name is Sheldon.
Hello, Sheldon.
And we're going to talk about the 8th step tonight. And believe it or not, there is an 8th step prayer that I just stumbled upon. And it says, God, help me to become willing to sweep away the debris of self-will and self-reliant living. Thy will be done for this person as well as for me. Amen. And that pretty much sums it up. For me, you know, it's very interesting. I was speaking at a meeting at the Boulevard Club in North Miami not too long ago. And at the end of the meeting, there's all people come up, thanks for sharing, thanks for your service, thanks for this, thanks for that. And there's this guy standing at the back of the room. And he says, I want to thank you for your share. You really touched me. And I said, what's your name? He says, my name's Judah. I said, Judah? Judah B? And he's like, yeah. How'd you know? I turned to him and I said, in 1986, I was working at a clothing store that your wife happened to own, and you came in on a Saturday morning holding a very significant bag of a white rock-like substance, and you asked me to hold it for you because you couldn't bring it in to wherever it was that you were going. And I said to him, you entrusted me with your goods. Big mistake. Said, the amends that I need to make to you is when I put it back in your hands, it was significantly lighter than it was when you first placed it in my hands. You know, it's interesting. That never made it onto my 4th step. That never made it onto my amends list. But you know, you never know when things are going to crop up that are just going to remind you of some of the wreckage of your past. And what do we do when those things happen? Do we run and hide, or do we confront them, walk through them, and be accountable for them? This was a fun one because he and I both laughed about it because it had happened how many years ago? Over, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, who knows? It was 83 and I saw him in 2025. So what's that? 42 years by my math. So yeah. And I remembered that exact instance. I remember I was working with another girl in the store and we were both just totally whacked out on this guy's stuff. And then he came back and it was like, oh crap, I got to be accountable for this. Nope. Just handed it back to him and he looked at it and he's like, it doesn't look the same as when I gave it to you. I said, what are you talking about? I wouldn't do that. But anyway, so here we are today talking about amends. Hi, Jill. And where does this all come from? We sit down with our sponsors. We sit down in a quiet place when we go through this rigorous inventory of ourselves. I remember going through my 4th step writing and sitting in my home office, and in the middle of it, I break down and cry, and I'm really emotional going through, reliving all of this wreckage and all of this carnage of my past. And I call my sponsor at the time, and he says 2 things to me. He says, if you're rigorously honest and thorough when you're going through this, you never have to do it again. But the biggest consoling that he gave me was when he said to me, you're not that guy anymore. You know, having gone through this process, having gone through 4 and 5, completely going through 6, where the men and women where the boys and girls become men and women, and we really grow up and try and live in the image and likeness of our Creator. Get away from our will and now really focus on doing His will. Where does this amends list come from? It comes from your 4th and 5th step. You know, this was the wreckage of our past. This was the carnage that we left behind us. My brother Arthur is here today, and I distinctly remember him sharing a story that was just so essential in me understanding this. He talks about a grenade. And for those of you who understand the workings of a grenade, when you pull the pin on a grenade, it's not just a localized explosion. There's this shrapnel that comes off of the grenade and impacts everything around it. We are that grenade. And around that grenade, there are different circles. The innermost circle is our family, the closest people to us, the people who supposedly mean the most to us. Those are the people who we hurt the most when that grenade explodes. Beyond that is our extended family. Beyond that are our friends and other acquaintances. Beyond that is our business associates, people who we've robbed, raped, and pillaged from, who are now suffering the carnage and the wreckage of our past. And what's our mission here? Our mission is to be accountable for all of that stuff that we've done. We've gone through the inventory. We've gone through getting quiet and reflecting on the first 5 suggestions that we've taken. And now we're truly into action. Probably the scariest thing that I could have gone to was sitting down with my brother. My brother was more of a father figure to me than my father was. My dad was a bang-up drunk. My father was an alcoholic. He was a professional musician and lived up to all of the things that you can imagine that a musician would be. Never home. I lived in constant fear. I dreaded hearing his car pull up in the driveway. I dreaded hearing the garage door open. I dreaded him walking in the house because you never knew if you were getting Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. And the things that I witnessed as a child, children should never have to witness. I've seen my mother fly down a flight of stairs. I've seen my father fly down the same flight of stairs. I've seen my father go after my mother with a knife. I've seen my mother go after my father with a knife. This is the life of a child in an alcoholic home. All right, Bossy's here. Should we start over? Welcome, brother. Glad you're here. These are things that a child should never have to see, but I did see. And as a result of it, my brother, who's 3.5 years older than me, took on a very, very nurturing role in my life. He felt the necessity to be the father that I didn't have. As a result of that, I resented him for a long, long time, and I did everything that I could to hurt him. And I hurt him in so many ways. But where did it really emanate from in going through this process? Where did it emanate from? I was jealous of him. Pride, ego. We talk about the 7 deadlies: pride, anger, greed, gluttony, lust, envy, sloth. I was envious of him. He took a leadership role in my family, and I didn't want to take direction from him. Sounds like I already had the patchwork of a budding alcoholic in my DNA right from the start. There was one thing that he taught me, though, that was really, really important. He was 3.5 years older than me, so when he was 17 and I was 14, he was hanging out with a bunch of his frat boys, a bunch of his buddies, and they started engaging in some non-conference approved material. They were smoking pot. And the only way that he could get away with smoking pot while I was around was making sure that I smoked pot with him, because if I partook in the same things he did, I wouldn't tell Mom. The only difference is he stopped, I kept going. I was that freight train. It started with pot. It started with alcohol at a very, very young age. You know, part of my religion at the time was drinking wine at every festival. Manischewitz, paying homage to my boy Stevie B. It was that Jewish table wine that we drank all the time. And my Zeta, my grandfather, would always make sure that once I had my bar mitzvah, I was old enough to drink with the family. And he made sure that part of the great tradition of the Last Supper, the Seder that we had, is it's tradition that there are 4 cups of wine that are ceremoniously drank throughout the dinner. And I drank all 4 cups of wine, and I got a great buzz on that night. Let me tell you, 13 years old, feeling absolutely no pain whatsoever. And I was like, whew, this is nice. I'm feeling powerful now. But little did they realize that I was already attending these family functions, these bar and bat mitzvahs that we would attend as young boys and girls. And at these bar and bat mitzvahs, there was this pretty little drink called a whiskey sour. Now, what was cool about whiskey sours is, first off, they had fruit in them, so they had to be good for you. And they tasted like Tang. And if Tang was good for the astronauts, it had to be good for me. So I know I'm dating myself. So I would drink these whiskey sours, and all of a sudden I had courage, liquid courage. I discovered liquid courage. I would go up to the pretty girls and ask them to dance with me. I couldn't dance, but let me tell you, when I had a couple of whiskey sours in me, I was Fred Astaire, baby. I was cutting a rug like there was nobody else. And that magic elixir just worked for me from the age of 12 and a half, 13 years old, straight through to age 44. On that Sunday morning when I walked into my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they started the meeting like we start most meetings, obviously not this meeting, Pat. But, they asked the question, is anybody here attending their very first meeting? And I saw what an alcoholic was. As I told you, my dad was an alcoholic. I swore up and down that I would never be that alcoholic, but I was exactly that alcoholic. And when they made that announcement in the meeting and they said, is anybody here attending their very first meeting? I stuck my hand up in the air for the very first time and I said, my name is Sheldon and I'm an alcoholic. And they read this thing called More About Alcoholism. They read this thing called More About Alcoholism. And it starts off, who wants to admit that they're an alcoholic? And I swear to God, as they were reading that page, I thought for sure somebody had been watching me and telling my story. The countless vain attempts, the pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, the wreckage that goes along with our alcoholism. So now here I am with my brother and dealing with that. And now I spend a little time in recovery, and it comes time for me to make amends to my brother. He was the first one that I needed to make amends to. And there were so many yeah buts and if onlys tied into that thought process that I wanted. Yeah, but you treated me. Yeah, but you beat me up. Yeah, but. And when I sat down and wrote it out, I wrote out exactly what I was going to say to him, and I shared it with my sponsor. And I read it to him, and he turned to me and he said, one thing. He said, this ain't about him. This is about you, your actions, your accountability, and your wanting to make that amends. Can you imagine going up to somebody who you really resented for a long time and having to say to them, I am responsible. I am accountable for the actions of my past. I'm taking steps today to make myself a better person. I've gotten involved in a program of recovery that helps me understand exactly why I did the things that I did. And for that, I am responsible. And I sincerely hope with all of my heart that in time, you can forgive me for my transgressions. That's an amends. That's not a, hey, buddy, I'm sorry. How many of you have thrown out those countless I'm sorries over the course of your alcoholism or drug addiction? Hundreds upon hundreds of hundreds. I'm sorry. I'm sorry the cash register was short this week. I have no idea how that could have happened. I could have sworn I counted it twice. All of these actions that we now have to be accountable for. And it says here, right in the book, it says we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. We got to do the deal. Let's look at step 8. We have a list of all persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. We made it when we took inventory. We subjected ourselves to a drastic, we've heard Russell allude to that word drastic once or twice, haven't we? Self-appraisal. Now we go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which has accumulated out of our efforts and live on self-will and run the show ourselves. I was definitely a self-will run the show guy. I didn't care when it came to school. I would find a way to lie, cheat, and steal. Why study when you can cheat? Why pay for something when you can steal it? That was my MO. That was how I ran. That was how I operated. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. Who do we ask? We ask God for the willingness. Remember, it was agreed at the beginning that we would go to any length for victory over alcohol. Probably there are still some misgivings as we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt. We may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. Let us be assured, to some people we need not. Here's the deal. I was in a couple of relationships, with people who I had definitely used, abused, and hurt. And when I went through that list of amends that I needed to make, because these people had made it onto my fourth step inventory, and my sponsor turned to me and he said, the best amends that you can make to a person like that is to just stay as far away as possible. If the opportunity comes that your paths cross, at that point, be accountable for your actions. But there's absolutely no reason whatsoever for you to have to reach out and rekindle those hurts and pains that you had caused. So I thought that was pretty good. Let us be assured, to some people we need not, and probably should not emphasize the spiritual features on our first approach. I have found God, and I am now a new person, and I'm a better person, and God loves me, therefore you should love me too. Nope, that's not going to fly. We might prejudice them. Let's face it, there will be contempt. We're coming into this thing so far behind the 8 ball that to push ourselves up and forward and really portray ourselves as somebody who has changed, there better be some action behind the words that you say. Because just talking the talk, you've been talking your talk, I've been talking the talk my entire life. But now I'm walking. Because I've gone through those first 7 suggestions. And my whole life has taken on a whole new meaning, and my perspective has changed. It's no longer my will that I'm following. I'm truly following a path that's divine. Not only is it a path that people who have come before me have shown me how to walk, but it's also a path that has connected me with God. It's a path that shows me that there's only one who's perfect. I am flawed, but I'm willing to look at my flaws and try and make myself better a day at a time. And let me tell you, it's not a quick remedy. It's a lifelong practice. God bless him. Jim Reedy, my first grand sponsor, beautiful old man, greeted me at the door when I first walked into the East Naples men's group on a Monday night, and he looked at me and he said, "Take it slow, son. You got the rest of your life to do this deal." He was a very, very wise man, and I loved him and I revered him. And he was the dad that I wish I had. He was such a beautiful, beautiful soul. I love that man. And he started a meeting in Miramar called the One Day at a Time group. And every time I walk into that room, I feel his energy there. There are certain people in your recovery that have a real impact on you, and he was definitely one of them. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and to the people about us. It's seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we have gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with your chin. I love that. We lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores. We may kill future opportunities to carry a beneficial message. That's why it's really, really critical that before I took any action to make any type of amends, I talked to my sponsor about it and said, this is what I plan on doing. Notice my words. This is what I plan on doing. That's already a mistake waiting to happen. Because if I'm planning it, it's got to be wrong. All right? But today, my perspective on these things has become so different. Before I take action, I sit down, I get quiet, and I pray. And I pray for the wisdom to see things the way God wants me to see them. That's step one. Step two is I call my sponsor and I say, hey, here's what's going on in my life. I'd really like your opinion on how you think I should handle this. And you know what? He's sitting right here. And I can tell you, even if he was sitting right here, he's very seldom misguiding in his direction for me. Even when I don't want to hear it, and it may not be what I want to hear, but he always tells me what I need to hear. And it may not be the action that I want to take, but it's the action that's going to give me the desired result. My desired result in everything that I do today is inner peace. I don't know about you guys, but I have this thing in the pit of my stomach today. It's called conviction. When I know I've done something wrong, and they still crop up every now and again, not as frequently as they used to, thank you, God, but they still crop up. But today when they crop up, instead of me looking for a place to hide, I feel that pit in my stomach that reminds me that I'm doing something that really is against God's will for me. And having the wisdom to recognize that only because we keep on showing up, we keep on hearing people share their experience, strength, and hope on the trials and tribulations that they've gone through that really act as a foundation, a pathway for us to follow. And this 8th step, it's really, really important that you seek counsel. It's like a criminal who goes into court and represents himself. What's the expression? Only a fool has himself for an attorney. Why do we hire an attorney to represent us in court? Because they know the law. They know exactly how to work through what we're going through and what is the proper course to take. And this is the exact same deal. When we have done this work thoroughly, when we've gone through that 4th and 5th step thoroughly, it's really important to reflect on that list. And harms, we talk about harms. And I was listening to a speaker at the 12-step house, and he talked about a harm done to somebody. He talked about the story that he had heard about somebody who had broken into somebody's house. Now, it was egregious enough that the person had broken into somebody's house and stole a bunch of family heirlooms and everything that was really, really important to the family. But what he didn't hear about was that their 12-year-old daughter hadn't slept in her bed for 6 months after the break-in because she had lived in terror. So was the harm done to the other person, to the people who lost their family heirlooms, or was the harm done to the 12-year-old kid who couldn't sleep in her room anymore because of her fear? That was such an eye-opener to me in understanding the nature of the bad stuff that I had done. It goes so much deeper than what's on the surface. You have to look at how the impact of your actions not only affects the people directly, but what is the shrapnel that we talked about earlier, and how is it affecting those outer circles that we had harmed? When I worked in a retail store and I decided that a portion of the take for the day should go to the Sheldon Fund, how much did I know, or did I even care, that the monies that I was taking out of the till that day could have been the money that the owner needed to buy his groceries for his family? Did I care? Absolutely not. But when I look back on it today and I think about the stuff that I did, and how to make amends to those people who I had harmed. You know, it's so much deeper than just the surface. It's so much deeper than what's just in front of us. And as we go deeper and deeper into this journey and get rigorously honest with the impact of our actions, we realize that some of the wreckage that we did can never be repaired. And the best way for us to repair that action is by changing ourselves, by being better people, by being of service, by extending ourselves to people coming into the rooms, doing service, making coffee, greeting at the door. But most importantly, setting up the room, breaking down the room, lining up the chairs if you have to. It's really important that we stay engaged with doing stuff for other people, because all of the wreckage, all of the stuff that was on 4 and 5 that end up on 8 and 9, all right, are just our selfishness, self-centeredness. We can justify anything. I could tell you why I stole from you. I could tell you why I cheated on my girlfriend. I could tell you why I hurt my mother. I could tell you why I lied to everyone. I was the consummate liar. I was such a good liar. I believed my own lies. They were so convincing that I believed them myself from a very, very young age. I remember, my dad, I said he was a musician, but as far as my friends were concerned, he was the most popular musician in the whole wide world. My dad was he was a gig guy. He played in clubs and everything. His moment in the sun. I'll share this because I know he's smiling down on me today. We were born in Montreal, Canada, and my father was a member of the Musicians Guild of Greater Montreal. Tony Bennett, for those of us olders, was coming to Montreal and his drummer got sick. So they called the musicians union and asked them to send their best drummer in to fill in. And they called my dad.
Wow.
Yeah. I have a beautiful 8x10 black and white picture of my dad playing drums behind Tony Bennett. That was his moment in the sun. But my dad, he suffered from this disease. He really, really did. And now, being sober for a little while, I understand why he behaved the way he did and why he did the things that he did. Sadly, he died at a very young age. He was 68 years old when he passed. He never got to clean up his stuff. He never got to sit down with his mom and let her know how he felt about the way he was treated as a child. He always lived in the shadow of his brothers. And his mother always made him feel less than. And his pride and his ego was definitely shattered as a result of that woman. And he never had a chance to clean that up. And I believe in my heart that ultimately killed him. And that was probably when he found his joy, was when he passed. He never lived a very happy life. And you know what? Today I understand that. And I don't resent him anymore. I was very fortunate that towards the end of his life, I was able to develop a really good relationship with him. My uncle reminds me often that before my dad passed away, he told him that I was his best friend. That meant a lot to me because he had been shunned by so many people. He also, as I said, he suffered from this disease and there was a lot of wreckage there. None of which he ever got to resolve, so he lived with that burden. We are graced, we are blessed to be able to make amends, to clean up the wreckage of our past, that when we're walking down the street and somebody who we have heard is walking towards us, we don't have to duck into an alley or walk onto the other side of the street. We can hold our heads high today. We can be accountable. We're nobody's doormat. We take responsibility for our actions. We own it. And we don't blame them for any of our actions. That's the biggest trap, is that yeah, but, and if onlys. The yeah, but, if you, that doesn't ever enter into this equation. And let me tell you, the peace, the inner peace that beautiful uplifting feeling that we have when we have cleaned up that wreckage, there's nothing better. It's absolutely wonderful to be able to clean up the wreckage, sit down with somebody and show them, tell them, and actually be an example of what the Lord wants us to be, and be able to share with them that we've taken action. We're not the people that we were. We have taken steps to make ourselves better people today. And we are willing to go to any length to clean up that wreckage, because the longer we hang on to it, the longer we hang on to that baggage, the heavier our load becomes. Our goal in this journey of sobriety is to be light. It's to be light, to lighten up all of that wreckage, and to be able to have that inner peace that we all really, really long for. I pray every morning. I pray that my actions are in line with what God wants me to do. I pray that I can help one person today, and that they can find their way into this wonderful way of life. And I try and do His work well every single day. And if a situation comes up where I'm accountable for my behavior, I own it, and I take responsibility for it. You know, I know Russell's going to be back next week, and he's going to talk about amends. You know, just remember one thing. The only way to truly be accountable for your actions is to own it, take responsibility for it, and change. Change yourself. Be more like Him and less of like me. Thank you all for letting me share.